All right, so I'm Ben Marshall from Radio Parts. For those of you who haven't met me before or don't know me by reputation, I'm essentially Radio Parts' resident geek. I get all the weird and wonderful questions and the technical stuff to talk about for training sessions and the rest of it, because I like it, because I enjoy it. So what I'm hoping to do today is give you a bit of an idea of CCTV cameras and camera systems. I'll go into some of the technical detail because I know it's important. If you know the technical stuff, you can sell any camera that's in the range for the right job in the right time. I was asked to do this, volunteered to do this, to split it up so that we're not covering absolutely everything about how a system goes together. We're just specifically looking today at the cameras. If I get some time at the end, which I didn't in the first session, I'll look at some of the accessories and things to go with it. If I'm missing any of those, I'll do them next time in 2 weeks when I talk about DVRs, recordings via NVRs and NAS drives and so on. So this is how to choose the right camera. The main three topics I'm going to be talking about are analog cameras, HD SDI cameras and IP cameras. The three different technologies kind of competing, kind of overlapping, and yet there are specific reasons to use each one in separate environments. Again, more details will be coming when I actually talk about the recording of all of these, but for today we'll go through the basics of what the cameras have got in common. I started writing this one 3 or 4 times, this particular presentation. The version you've got now is coming from a place of people always ask me questions about CCTV systems after they've gone wrong. After they bought one, it didn't see what they wanted it to see. They bought a kit and it didn't have enough cable. They can't see at night time. It fell down after 2 months. Whatever happened to it? And so I'm trying to take it from the point of, if they had these questions or this information at the start, they might have chosen better cameras, better system to suit exactly what they wanted to do. Of course, I'm fully aware of the fact that some people are always going to be based purely on budget, and a $300 kit is a nice, attractive thing. But I'll talk about some reasons why it's a good idea and some reasons why it's a really bad idea in a moment or two. I am going to talk about theory. I'm going to talk about it hopefully quite quickly. If you have any problems, stop me, put your hand up, yell stop in a loud carrying voice, and I'll hopefully be able to answer any questions you come up with or clarify something. I don't think I got anything particularly wrong in the first session, but if I did, and I'll fix it on the fly, if I get it wrong this time as well, please let me know. I like being wrong. It means that I can learn something for the day as well. Alright, so very, very basics of what makes up a CCTV camera system. That's it. Cameras, power supply, recorder of some kind, and then maybe connection to the internet and to a mobile phone, to a computer, to something else in the outside world. That's a basic analog system. Cables between each of the components, running out to the internet, and off you go. Great, simple. If you do an HD SDI system, it's the same thing. You've still got cables running between them. You've got different cameras and a different recorder. You've still got the same sort of power supply. You've still got the same sort of connection to the internet, to mobile phones and to computers and everything else that's remotely there. The same idea, just replace a couple of the parts. IP systems can change that slightly. An IP camera system could be wireless. It could be run over a data network. Well, generally is run over a data network, so you're going to have switches and routers and rack-mounted equipment and a lot of data cable running from point to point to point. You still probably have a power supply as a standalone device, or it might be built into one of your components using power over Ethernet or something like that. You can also run these things to an outside network, or you can cut that off completely. And the idea behind that is your internal camera feeds you might not want to send to every Tom, Dick and Harry that's down the street. The manager doesn't necessarily need to see who's working on a Saturday from home. He might want to check the recordings afterwards to see who pinched $100 out of the till, but he doesn't need to see it right that second. But that is a basic camera system. That's what makes up a kit. If your first experience with CCTV was a $300 kit that you bought from your local hardware store, this is pretty much what you'd have. 4 cameras, 4 sets of cabling, a recorder of some kind, a power supply might be built into the recorder or a separate power supply, and some basic setup instructions on how to get it online and viewing remotely on your mobile phone. which is fantastic. But there are limitations to each individual part within that might mean it's perfect for you or might mean it is absolutely the wrong thing. So let's look at those three technologies in more detail. Analog, to start off with, is the most common to us. DOS have had a range of analog cameras for many, many years now. Generally speaking, they record from about 480 TV lines up to around about 700 TV lines. As Mike pointed out, my boss pointed out in the first session this morning, there are potentially capabilities to record up to 1,000 TV lines through analog. The factories are claiming they can do it. It is not, it's kind of a he said, she didn't say, looking at targets to say whether it's 1,000 lines or not. Once they get it a little bit better, we'll get some test cameras and see if it actually works or not. Analog systems are really, really, really cheap and simple to run. This is a pre-made cable. It's a 30-meter cable. It's about, $25, $30 to buy one of these cables. It comes with the ends attached. You don't have to do any fancy crimping, any special tools or anything else to run it. And for short distances, it's perfect. It carries your video and your power over two separate cables running through one combined sheath when you get to here. Yeah, simple and cheap. However, analog systems have got limitations beyond the resolution. The settings that are on cameras are much, much more limited when you talk about analog cameras versus their HD SDI and IP camera brethren. You can't put much of a brain into an analog camera before it starts being too expensive and may as well be one of the better ones. So you might have some infrared control, you might have some wide dynamic range, you might have some motion detection and so on. But the really good stuff doesn't happen until you start spending some serious money to go up to the bigger cameras. HD SDI is the next technology up, or off to the side if you want to put it that way. It is a 1080p technology by its very nature. In broadcast TV and broadcast video world and recording video world, HDMI cables are bad. They are inflexible for the most part. They break. Over long distances, they're useless. You can't coil them up on the fly and spool them out as you're moving the camera around with you. They had to come up with something better for it, and HD SDI is sort of the result of all those technologies. There's even a 3D SDI and other versions now for higher resolution recordings as well. But it runs through an RG59 coaxial cable, exactly the same, or almost exactly the same as an analog system does. If you want to ignore the audio that can actually be sent through true HD SDI, if you look at only the video, you can run it through a standard RG59 cable with a standard B&C connector on the end of it. And the biggest benefit of that is, if you've already got an analog system in your house or in your customer's property, pop out the cameras that are there, plug in the HD SDI ones, plug in a new DVR to record those HD SDI signals, and you've got a high resolution system without having to spend 6 hours running cables through the walls, which is fun.
Question for you.
Of course.
The SDI ones, haven't they got a limitation on what length of cable it can do?
Yes, they do. It's, I'm trying to remember. It's about 100 meters normally. Going beyond that, you can actually get boosters that send it further. And
they brought out a balun?
There is. We're testing it at the moment. You can run HD SDI over Cat5 or Cat6 to get longer distances, longer runs. We've got a couple of them coming in from overseas. We're not buying big quantities. There might be 10 to 20 in our first order because they're expensive. You're probably looking at balun sets that are going to be $150 to $200 retail. So if you absolutely have to, you can, but you're not talking the same as a $20 analog to Cat5 or Cat6 balun. But yeah, good question. The other things that the two biggest limitations for me for HD SDI are it's highly dependent on the cabling quality. You wouldn't want to use one of these pre-made leads to run HD SDI. This isn't the best quality B&C RG59 connection. In fact, I'm not even sure what it is in one of these cables. They're great for short runs for analog stuff, but you can't get the bandwidth of video that you need for HD SDI through one of these easily. You want to use the separate cable, our CCTV COM24, so RG59 plus figure 8 works perfectly for HD SDI, and we've tested it out for 100 meters or more on a reel without any trouble at all. if you're going to a house with existing cabling and they've bought a kit, it probably has similar cabling to that in it. It probably will not work with HDSDI, but you can try. If it does, fantastic, and you've saved yourself a lot of time and hassle, but your customer needs to know. If it doesn't, you're going to be back for 8 hours running new cables and drawing them through the walls, or however long it takes. So yeah, quality of the cabling is pretty important for that. HDSDI coax is actually better than RG59. It's better structured, better made, better specs internally, but it will work over RG59, providing it's decent.
So if people asking, you just going to recommend RG59?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, CCTV COM24, RG59, if they've used, it's one of the reasons why I prefer not using pre-made cables with jobs to start off with. A professional installer who wants to save time can find other ways to save time rather than using a cheaper or a simpler cable to do it. For somebody who's running their own analog system at home and wants to do it quickly, pre-mades are fantastic. But for everybody else, use the real cable, use the real crimp tools, use real soldered DC plugs or screw down DC plugs. They'll make your life so much easier by doing it.
You're talking about RG59 copper to copper?
Yeah, absolutely. One last thing on HDSDI, they're a technology that kind of sits off to the side from the mainstream. Most people go from analog up to IP. HDSDI is off to the side. The quality's there with IP, the features can be there with IP, but there aren't as many people doing it, which means there are less options with cameras, lenses, and the recorders to go with it. You try to find an HDSDI DVR, there's two that we currently can range. A 4-channel that we buy in from overseas, and a couple I think that NES Corporation do. They're good DVRs, they work really well for HDSDI, they're fantastic, but if you want more features, if you want extra stuff, if you want things beyond what those couple have got, there aren't that many options even in Australia to do it. It is more of a replacement system. If you're running a new wire, a new system, you're probably going to go IP first over HDSDI. But if you've got an existing building with cabling that you can't get through and do anything with, HDSDI gives you an easy upgrade path to go up to high def without too much drama, we hope. Which moves me on to IP cameras. Now, IP cameras, typically they record or they're working at 720 high def, 1080p high def, full high def. And some test ones and specialist purposes are running high resolution versions of those as well. You can actually run lower. There's no theoretical lower limit or upper limit to what you can run with IP. I've got a couple of little cameras that I'm running at home, which are 480p and 720p cameras, and they're often better to stream in 240p. I know what's going on, I just don't need the detail. Unique camera options are also part of an IP range. You can get hemispherical cameras or fisheye cameras. So put one right back up in the center of the ceiling with a 5 megapixel image, 5 megapixel sensor, and what it does is it digitally splits that into 4 separate sections. So I get essentially 4 cameras firing down in each direction. And the software is smart enough to map that odd curved shape onto a flat surface and give you the right image and give you the right video feed that you need to do it. Hemispherical cameras are awesome. They're not cheap, but they're awesome. They run over data networks, so standard Cat5, Cat6 will do the job. Even Cat5 is okay for most of them. They may run local power. They might run power over Ethernet, so you look for PoE on your switches and hubs and routers and so on for it. One thing you need to notice though is that there are different ratings and different power requirements for each camera, the same as there would be in an analog world. So just because it says needs PoE, has PoE, doesn't mean the two products are going to work together properly. If this thing doesn't have enough capacity to supply enough power to do that thing, the thing will fail or this thing will burn out. So manage your cameras very carefully, look at what all their power requirements are like you would for any other system, and make sure your gear can handle it. Wireless options are fantastic with IP. They run on 2.4 gig or 5 gig networks. You can run wireless access points like the Ubiquitys. You run nano bridges, which will give you 30 kilometers in the right environment or more. So you can link a camera from that end of your property where the fuel shed is right back to your house, so you know what's going on even though it's 20 or 30 kilometers away. Awesome stuff. You can't do that with analog easily. Analog wireless connection might get you a couple of 100 meters if you're lucky. And they tend to be pretty spread, so you get a loss of signal in all directions, and your image quality at the other end is not necessarily so good. But wireless with IP works very, very nicely. They're smarter cameras, generally speaking, but they're more complicated to get right. Because they have 1,000 options, making sure you get the 10 right that you need to get right might take you more time if you're not used to doing it. So, yeah, good fun to play with. And one last kind of drawback or option with it is 1080p recording through a network. One signal, not a problem. Most networks. You can handle that amount of data going through and doing what it does. If I run 2 cameras now, 4 cameras, or 8 cameras, or 16 cameras, I need some really robust network hardware to be able to handle all that bandwidth. Otherwise, I could cause crashes on the network because too much data is going to the wrong place and not switching properly through it. So good quality network hardware helps. The other option is to have 2 separate networks. Have my IP camera network on all these cables, and have all my data network on these cables, and I put some sort of, I put a NAS or an NVR or something in there that connects into the other one that says, here are all the cameras from the other network. It's easy enough to do it, and if you've got the capability to run the cables to do it, it's well worth it. Brands today. I'm not talking about DOS cameras or whatever, but I would like to mention that we don't sell a lot of IP cameras, I think because most people don't know that we can actually get them. We don't keep them on a shelf normally, but we can get them from Melbourne suppliers within a day or two, generally speaking. The most common ones we probably use would be Vivotech, a cheaper professional camera. There's ACTI, A-C-T-I, there's Axis, and we can even get into Mobotics and Panasonics and Samsungs or Sonys and other stuff like that as well. So if you've got a particular spec or you've got an idea for a job, let us know and we'll find out what we can and get you the right cameras to do the job. My last thing I wanted to say about IP cameras specifically is in my own head I divide them up into 3 ranges. I have brand X consumer entry-level products, and a perfect example of that in this case is one of our little DOS ones. A very simple wireless pan, tilt and zoom camera. Wireless antenna on the back of it, or you can run it into Ethernet. It's got its own power supply, it's got a QR code, you can scan it onto your phone, plug it into your network, and it runs. You get a wireless stream that you can control what angle it's running at. Cheap and simple. You're not looking at the highest resolution imaging, you're looking at just something that does the job really, really basic sense. And by my other end of this scale is that one, this one, which is running in my kitchen at home. So this is a little D-Link DCS 942L. That's my lovely hand wash, that's my lovely dishwash, there's my sink, there's my bell on the wall. It's a very, very exciting view that you've got there of my house. It's a 480p IP camera that's smaller than my fist. It's got basic infrared capability for night. It's got a rubbish little sensor on it, but it's enough for me to know that something's going on. I've got an alarm system in there which is going to trigger and tell me if something major is happening, and this just gives me a quick vision of what's happening at the time. This one retails for about $200, and the other one I've got in my other room is about $250, $260. This is 480, the other one's a 720p recorder. These are really entry-level consumer products though. To get these things set up, I plugged it into my router, I logged into them remotely, did an auto setup, set up a D-Link, my cloud, whatever device account, and it was up and running. All my footage bounces from here to my modem, to the D-Link servers back down to here, to my laptop, to the screen. So there's a sort of roundabout way that this stuff is getting to me. I can set it up directly, I can set up recording and so on for it, but I mean, it's pretty low res. It's just something to do a job. My house is getting sold in the next few weeks to the next month or so. I wanted a couple of cameras around the place so I could keep an eye on what was going on, and being a renter, I can't exactly run cables through all the walls without getting into trouble. So wireless cameras, little wireless IP ones, didn't cost me too much and they work quite well. Step up from those, from the really, really, really basic consumer ones, is to what it's a horrible term, but prosumer is probably the best description for it. You've got brand names like Panasonic, Sony, Samsung, and so on. John's been talking to me about Panasonic cameras in that sort of range. They've got more limited lens options, more limited CCD, sensor sizes, and other stuff I'm going to go into later. Generally go up to about $500 or so retail. again, they're sort of 1 or 2 devices for a home or for a small office that just needs a quick bit of monitoring. Beyond that, you go into the Axis, Acti, Vivotech, Mobotics cameras and so on that have got professional features, professional lenses, adjustments, wide dynamic range options. Some of them have got really smart motion detection options in there as well. So, let's keep on moving. I've talked about these quite a bit.
Sorry, Ben, just one thing.
Of course, Joe.
A few of the guys have been using, like, these ones you put up, like, off the works off like the 3G, some people will send snapshots to your phone and
Yep.
to your email. What's your view on that? Is good for purpose, or
Yeah.
some people are still saying, oh, I just want to chuck them up and achieve something more, then they want to just work kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. For the camera and for the recording, basically what Darren's talking about are standalone devices that run over your data network and link to a phone or to an account, and when motion detection is sensed, they send you a snapshot on your phone of what the camera sees. I can think of fantastic uses for those. Put a little standalone car, one of those little cameras up on the side of a pillar near your fuel depot at the back of your property, where you've still got enough 3G signal to get there, but you don't want to dig a 50 metre trench, right? You don't want to dig a 50 metre trench to get from there back to the house to do it. So this thing just links up wirelessly, and every time somebody drives in through that back gate with a motion detection set off, up on your phone comes a little notification. You can download the image to see who it was, what happened to it, and so on. I think it's actually coming from hunting technology. We used to put these things up on hunting blinds, so you could see when wild pigs or kangaroos or whatever it is went past you knew where they were and what they were moving. And before that, it probably came from the environmental mobs trying to monitor the movement of these things. But anyway, for that purpose, they're absolutely fantastic. In a house, it's a really controlled environment. They work quite well. The thing is, how high resolution they are, how good the cameras are, will make a big difference in what they can do, and how good the data network is, how many motion detection events you trigger. I mean, if you get 10 motion detection events every 5 minutes, that would be enough to drive me bananas. So setting it up very carefully would be important too. But for their purpose, they're great.
The IP cameras as a security, can't they be easily hacked into the IP addresses?
Not necessarily.
Not that easy?
Depends how they're set up. It's IP cameras when you're accessing them remotely. There's always a possibility that somebody could go in and do it. If they know your username and password, or they can guess it or brute force it, and the number of people that use admin and admin as their passwords for everything, or 123456 or password, I mean, you don't have to be that smart to get past a lot of them, but the security that's on them, if they were local to your network, they have to bypass your home security, your home wireless security. Not easy to do.
Yeah.
If you're remote and you're trying to log in, you've got to know what port you're going for, and you still need the username and password. There are ways around it, but it's pretty difficult. And you can also, it's something that's probably beyond what we're talking about today, but when you set up the software for things like this, I can set up IP addresses that are allowed to access it and other ones that aren't. So I put my phone's, if I had a static phone IP address, I could put that in there. I could put in their work IP address from there, and maybe my flatmate's wireless IP address, and only people at those places using those networks can log in. Doesn't mean that Steve couldn't log in using one of the computers here if he wanted to, because it's still on the same IP address, but it does lock it down a lot more, and you won't get the stereotypical Russian hackers trying to get in and have a look at what's inside your house. The other side of this is you've also got a certain amount of security through obscurity too. Nobody wants to see my kitchen sink, so I'm less worried about showing you what that is or how that works. If I had that focused on the safe that's buried in the backyard with my golden the Ark of the Covenant, if I had the video on that, then probably I wouldn't be sharing that with everybody around the world, but it's the way it goes. And that's why a lot of corporate networks are locked down. They don't have remote access for it. It's all internal, so works really well.
Just quickly, I know you're going to talk about DVRs next.
Yeah, definitely.
What do you have like storage, like HD SDI to analog? Roughly, is it a ratio? Like, is it 4 times more? Or?
Well, you think about it in terms of 576 line or 540 line D1 recorder. to get to high definition, you're roughly 4 times as much, to 720 odd range.
Okay.
To go up to 1080 range, you're roughly 4 times again the amount of resolution. So it could be 12 to 16 times the amount of data.
Oh shit, more than...
Yeah. So it also depends
It's
a
a
lot on
geometric progression. It's not a...
yeah, it's not a straight thing, and it also comes down to the compression methods that you use too. H.264 versus MJPEG versus MPEG-4 and whatever else, depending on what formats you choose, will make a difference there too. And yeah, you're right, it is a geometric thing. It's not linear to 16, but it's significantly more data. Yeah. Okay. So that's slide 3, and I'm 20 odd minutes in, so I'm going to have to try and burn through some of this a little bit faster, otherwise I'm going to keep you here all morning. I'm talking predominantly, I want to talk predominantly about cameras, but I'm happy to go into whatever area we want, because it's what you guys need to know. This is my view of what you need to know to pick a camera. For an IP system, an HD SDI signal, from an analog system, it doesn't matter. These are the basic things you need to know. You need to know if your camera has a fixed or varifocal lens. You need to know about the resolution and compression that's in the camera or that you're dealing with. Whether it has something like wide dynamic range, whether it's a day, night or indoor, outdoor. The last one should be pretty self-explanatory. You look at a camera and it looks like it's made of marshmallow, it's probably for inside use. If you look at something and you could shoot a shotgun at it and it wouldn't dent it, then it's probably outdoor vandal-proof camera. Day or night, look for infrareds, don't look for infrareds. Yeah, it gives you a pretty quick guide on what's going on. This is also where a lot of those pre-made kits fall down, because you're not thinking about any of these things when you do it. You're thinking about the fact, I want 4 cameras for somewhere, 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 and somewhere at my house. They're roughly 20 metres away from the main unit, so the kit comes with enough cabling. I've got a box to record it. That's it. I'm done. The problem is, if your well, actually, here's the opportunity for you. If your house is perfectly suited to the average house that they're looking for, if your driveway is only a certain distance, if you only need to see so much detail at your front door, your back door you're not worried about covering the entire backyard, but you want to cover that section of it. If you only need to see 5 to 10 metres at night time using the built-in infrared, why wouldn't you go for one of those kits? $300, $400, it's cheap and simple, and it works. But if you have to alter any part of that to do anything else with it, or even think about these to do something better with it, then that kit starts to fall down and starts becoming a much more expensive option. Your fixed lenses may not work the angles that you're looking at. Your fixed lenses in the kit might be useless in your particular house. Your driveway is 10 metres wide because you've got a 3-car garage, versus the guy who's got a single carport that they're looking at when they designed the kit. Your backyard is a wide backyard, rather than that basic, let's look at that wedge of your backyard that they looked at when they made the kit. This is where most of my questions come from, most of the questions to me come from, and I know for you guys as well. It's from people who already have something and want to know how to make it better, or they want to know how to fix the limitations on what they already had, and that could include facial recognition, license plate stuff as well, which I will go into in more details very, very soon. You cannot judge a camera by its looks. These are 4 cameras. Obviously the manufacturers have shared the tooling for the outside of them. This one's actually smaller than the others. I've faked it a little bit by making it look, was messing with my sense of neatness by having it smaller than the others, but you can see the outside shells of these are all very, very similar. They're from completely different manufacturers with completely different internals. The one on the top left-hand side is a fixed 6mm lens and 600 TV lines. This little one's got less infrared. It's a 4mm fixed lens with 540 TV lines resolution. Bottom left-hand corner is not bad, 2.8mm to 11mm lens, which tells you it's a good Korean lens. It's got 700 TV lines. It's got an FEOE DSP chip, and I'll go into that later on, but FEOE is the entry-level stuff. So it's less good in outdoor environments where there's a lot of lighting differences that can cause problems. And compare it with the one on the bottom right. For all of you who shop at Radio Parts, or all of you who have ever bought one of these cameras or sold one of them, that's a Dome 30W Pro, which has got 4 to 9mm lens, but it's got the 700 line recording, and it's got the FEOP, the Pro Series sensor that's got wide dynamic range built into it, which I love, and I will tell you more about it later when I get into DSPs. But to start with, I want from 3 of you what the 3 main internal components are of a camera. I've already actually mentioned all 3 of them so far. So who wants to give me the first one, the easy one? James?
Lens.
Lens, fantastic. Next one.
Infrared.
Sorry?
Infrared.
What's that?
Infrared.
Infrared doesn't have to be on the camera. So
Chip
the sensor, absolutely, the CCD sensor. Good. And one last bit. I mentioned it as well.
The signal processor.
Signal processor, fantastic. It is in your notes in front of you. If you're clever and reading along with it, you would have been able to spot that, as I think probably James did. Fantastic. So yes, they're the 3 basic parts of it. So here's my stylized impression of how it works. We've got a waving polar bear who's happy the humans have left. He's out in the environment doing his thing. The lens is capturing the light that's coming off him. It's actually just pulling the light in and focusing it on the sensor or CCD or CMOS or whatever you want to call it on the board inside the eye. That goes through the DSP, which processes the signal, so that's the brain, and then produces the video out at the other end of it. Generally, pretty similar thing happens in standard point-and-shoot cameras to DSLRs and other stuff like that. There are variations on how it works, but these are the central components. So I'm going to talk about all 3 of these in a little bit of detail, but the main one I want to focus on is lenses. So let's start with that. Yay, maths. Nerdy stuff. I like this. I'm not going to go into this, read every single line and point out every single thing that's in there. I did this for completeness and so that you trust my calculations, and when I tell you I've done the right thing. And no, I didn't copy and paste this from somewhere, that I calculated all this lot. It is all calculated for perfect theoretical situation, where the lens is just so, where the focal length is just so, where everything works the way it's supposed to. In practice, there will always be variations. So don't rely on this as a guide for every camera. It will be different for every single one that comes across. Look to your manufacturer's specs if you can, and even then, weigh them up with a bit of a grain of salt. There could be a bit of variation either side. So let's start with the image down the bottom. It is in your books as well if you want to have a closer look, but the resolution's a bit crummy. We've got a sensor on this side, so this is our CCD, our CMOS, our main sensor inside the unit. It's a physical thing with a physical fixed size. You've got a focal length for the lens. That's the distance from the lens that the image is focused. That's fixed depending on what the lens is. You've got a working distance, which is the distance to whatever your target is. And this is your target area or your field of view. So this is what the camera sees given those conditions. So this is where this table comes in. If I take a fixed sensor size that's here, but I move my focal length closer, so I move my lens closer, I use a lens that has a shorter focal length. By moving the lens to here, I move this thing so it goes to there. When those light beams come out the other side, they spread out and I end up with the larger field of view. So the smaller your focal length, the larger the field of view you're going to get. And so if you have a look, basic for the 2.8, the 4 and the 6, at 1.5 metres you've got a 4.3 metre wide image, a 2 metre wide image and a 1.2. So it's inverse from the actual size of the focal length you're working with. Anybody who's dealt with cameras, whether it's whether it's these sort of cameras or even just standard point and shoot digital cameras will know this sort of thing inherently. But I wanted to give you an idea how bad that can be when you start getting to the edges of this. So, 4.3 to 2 metres, okay, that's maybe not so bad. Let's look at this thing at 30 metres. At 30 metres, a 2.8mm lens is going to give you 80 metres wide field of view. An analog camera running at 700 lines of resolution, 80 metres wide, is getting, what, a pixel, not even a pixel per metre. So you've got, this entire blob of me is a big blob. It's completely useless in terms of footage. You have to be close to be able to use this sort of footage. Compare that with the 50mm one right down the bottom here. Even at 30 metres away, this is producing a 2.4 metre by 1.8 metre image. That's more or less the size of this screen. That's from 30 metres away, it's producing something that size. It's actually a little bit off from that, but that's roughly the idea. So the relationship is, oops, wrong way, let's try this. That. As the focal length goes up, the field of view gets smaller and gives you a narrower angle. So, more directional, more focused in that area, using all that resolution to get as much of the image as you can fit in that screen. The other side of things, you get a great wide angle view, but you get very little detail because your field of view and your wide angle is huge. So choose your cameras carefully based around this. That will make a big difference. To give you a more practical example of that, I'm going to use Mike in my demo. So, I've got a 1.5 metre distance, and I have very roughly estimated the field of view, which is the outside size, and the size of Mike's head, which is a fixed size at each of those locations. And to make it fit properly, I've kept all the fields of view the same, and I've just changed the size of his head to match what we're trying to do with it, obviously. So, average face area is about 0.04 metres squared. It's about 22 centimetres by about 18 centimetres for most people. If you're bigger, like me, it's bigger. If you're stung by bees in the face, then it will probably be bigger as well. If you're South Korean, I think they have some of the smallest facial areas in the world. You're at the other end of that scale for some reason. But in this case, looking at a 2.8mm lens, you can barely tell that it's Mike. It's a guy in a blue shirt who might be smiling, could be screaming at you, no idea. The 4mm lens, he's starting to make more sense. We can kind of see that there's a bit of a smile there, although we're not sure if he's got a twinkle in his eyes and he's happy with us or not. The 6mm lens, it's taking up much more of the field of view. It's actually 86 pixels wide if you're using D1, their standard analog resolution. And it's about 15% of the total area of that, that camera sees at that distance. And with a 12mm lens at 1.5 metres away, well, he's taking up 30% of the total area that the camera sees, and it's 176 pixel wide at D1 resolution for analog. So what that means is, this is facial recognition for somebody that doesn't know him. This is facial recognition for those of us who do know him. This is that guy in the blue shirt, and that one is possibly a guy in a blue shirt. And so different cameras or different lens options will give you a very, very different result. So choosing them very carefully is important. Can anybody see the downside in this particular lens at this distance to do this, to capture an image? Is it that?
Just a narrow view.
Absolutely. So what happens if Mike steps 2 feet to, 1 foot to his right? Gone. He's done. So this is perfect if you can control the environment right down that you're looking for. So think about doorways, think about stairwells, think about narrow alleyways, think about car parks. You want to capture the bit where they're coming into the car park. It's less important to see where they go when they get in on this camera, but if you want that license plate, you've got to get them where you've got the narrowest field you possibly can, where you can use all of that detail in the smallest area you possibly can. Otherwise, yes, you can end up with some dramas. So I think what I said in the first session kind of works for me in that any camera is a facial recognition camera. Any camera is a vehicle license plate recognition camera if used correctly and used in the right environment. You choose the lens right, you choose the location right, it will do that job for you. It might mean in the case of the 2.8mm lens that you are 30 centimetres from somebody's face. So you've got it on the door frame as they walk past it. Okay, that might be where you get facial recognition there. If you want to try and get a license plate from 100 metres away, you better hope you've got one hell of a lens on there and you've got one narrow area where you can actually get that camera to focus right in on. And of course the resolution of the cameras makes a difference too, but I'll get to that as we move on with some of the other stuff. Alright, vehicle license plates and facial recognition are some of the most technical things to get right about CCTV systems. So ask the questions, find out what you need to, know your areas very, very carefully, and you can choose the right thing to do the job. Right? And it's number one sort of customer dissatisfaction with CCTV systems is when they don't see what they wanted to see. Oftentimes it's because they didn't tell you they wanted to see that until after you put it in, and then you've got to manage their expectations afterwards. But Graham had an example that I actually put him onto a job which I I almost regret it now, but she bought a camera system based off not much in the way of recommendation, and decided afterwards that they wanted to be able to see license plates in an alleyway from 40 metres away with a fixed lens, odd lighting conditions and other things like that. The camera they had was never going to do that job. You know, it wasn't asked for, so it wasn't specified to be the right camera. So if you can find all this information out first and ask these questions of your customers, they won't be coming back asking you about it afterwards. They'll hopefully be asking you back to do their business as well and do their neighbour's house when they will ask for a recommendation. So the maths, unfortunately, although it's slightly dull, is important to do it in the first place. So, on license plates, I did a few videos in our showroom and I have played around with settings as we go, and I'll try to tell you, to be honest, about what I've done. That should be 7 metres, not 5 metres. I made a boo-boo when I printed it and I forgot to fix it between the two sessions, so bear with me. This first system is 2 metres away from our IN15 Eco, which is about our cheapest camera. It's limited resolution, fixed lens camera, but at 2 metres away I can clearly see my fake license plates on the box over there. Alright, no problems with that at all. That's 2 metres away. I go to, let's have a look, 5 metres with the same camera. Actually it's 7 metres here, that's a little bit further away. At 7 metres I can kind of get what the top line is, but I'll be damned if I know what that is underneath it. But just the data isn't there. The camera can't pick up enough detail at that distance. So this camera is useless for license plates there, but it gives me a good idea of who's walking around the store and who's kind of put their hand in and out of boxes. If I look at, okay, let's move across to these ones. This is the Dome 30, our our standard Dome 30s. I've set the focus quite narrow, and so you can see it clearly. It's filling up most of the screen. There's no question about what that says. There's not much detail in and behind it, but you don't care. That's what you're looking for right there. I take that same Dome 30 and I move the box back to 5 metres. There I am.
How can you be there if you're here?
The thing you should be worrying about is where I go to when it does that. Yeah.
It's a Ben's appearance.
Yeah, it's my top hat and rabbit time.
The light flashes and he's gone.
Exactly.
She sent us YouTube.
So the idea with this is, I've changed the focus on the camera and I've changed the angle of the lens. Because it's a Dome 30, it's got a 4 to 9mm manual lens in it. So instead of being focused down here close to 2 metres where I was, I pushed it back further. And so I have more detail there and I can still see that license plate. So it's a good general purpose camera when you're doing that kind of job with it. If I go up to, this is a 7 metre range using the IN50 Pro. And the white balance is off, I need to adjust it, but even with this, the detail is clearly in that license plate, and this is 7 metres away from it. If you start pushing this further and further and further, I mean that is about 8.5, 9 metres away, and it's a similar size of font to it. When you start getting over to the back wall, which is what, 15, 20 metres away from it, we haven't got a lot of detail there. So moving the focus on the IN50 further, narrowing that field down further means you'll capture less of this, less of that, but in this section through the middle, you should be able to get better detail through there as well. So that's the IN50 Pro, and the 3 middle ones are actually 1080 recordings at the same ranges. Yeah, what do you expect? 2 metres away with a 1080 recorder, you can see it. This one's 5 metres away with the same recorder. It's a lot smaller, but it's still clear. Go down to the 7 metre away one, and yes, it's still clear. Because it's 1080p, there's more data there too, so if I have to zoom into it, I can actually pull the information out that I want to. So, very, very useful. So there's my little videos from the floor. And that's all I really wanted to say about lenses. So we got the idea, we know how they work and what they're used for and how to choose the right one. Okay?
I got one.
Of course.
If that's inside. Now if you're
Yes.
outside and you've got the sunlight
Sure.
facing into the lens, there's actual special cameras and that do that too.
There are, definitely.
That'll phase out the sunlight and also focus in on the actual...
Yeah, absolutely. The question basically comes down to what happens if the conditions aren't perfect. You know, you could be inside and you've got flickering lights. You could be a doorway that opens to the outside world. You could be outside in an alleyway where the light is there for 2 hours of the day and not there for the other hours, you might have cars with headlights going through and the rest. Yes, there are technologies definitely to do that. They're built normally into the processing chips that are in there, so I'll talk more about them when I get to those, but keep your eyes and ears open for WDR. It's one of my favourite technologies for a reason. So, and I've got some good videos on that too. Alright, moving on to the sensor. This is again a bit nerdy. This, in fact, I'll be really quick on. A sensor, its sole job is to pick up the light that comes in and convert it to an electrical signal. That's it. The bigger the CCD or the sensor is, the more light it captures, which means better low light performance. It can also mean better colours, better performance in brighter conditions, and so on. And you can see these are all in millimetres, these sizes, but that's a 1/4 inch chip, a 1/3 inch chip, and a 1/2 inch chip. And you can see they're physically bigger sizes. The 1/3 inch is probably the most common. Those little cameras I've got at home have got 1/4 inch sensors in them. So no matter what the lenses are, they're always going to capture less light. In fact, they're pretty hopeless at night time. Infrared on it kind of helps, but it's still, you know, you can't tell the difference between a potato and a human being for sure. I did want to point out one thing that I missed on the previous slide. If we go back to this, if I adjust the sensor size on this and leave the focal length the same, I change the sensor size to half, I've got this sitting here, I've still got the lens at the same focal length, I've only got a narrow field of view. So if you change the sensor size down with the same focal length, you're going to get a narrower field of view or a narrower angle of image. Conversely, if you go to a larger sensor size and use the same focal length, you're going to get a much wider field of view. It's just basic optics, that's how it works. So because a 1/4 inch camera's got a 4mm sensor on it, a 4mm lens on it, is not the same as a 1/3 inch camera with a 4mm lens on it. Both of those two work together. You need to be sure of what you're getting. Most professional stuff will use a 1/3 inch sensor. It's rare to find a 1/4 inch in high-end stuff. Some have got a 1/2 inch sensor. There are 1 inch sensors in some components as well. So yeah, so sensors, pretty simple. One last point on these. IP cameras and HD SDI cameras can, if the option is allowed for in their hardware and software, take high resolution images while they're streaming video. So you might have a 5 megapixel IP camera in a spot. It's streaming 1080p because that's the maximum it can do based on everything else that's in there. But I can tell it to trigger a photo and it grabs a lovely 5 megapixel still image of what's going on.
In the middle of the stream.
In the middle of, well, it's separate to the stream. So you've got, so you just sort of take it.
Separate channel.
Exactly, yeah. It might be stored locally on the camera or it could be sent on a different data stream on the network to it. But the 1080p goes through, trying to pull an individual frame out of a 1080p stream depends a lot on the format. So you take a standard video, like if you pause your DVD player at home and you see the most gorgeous looking actress in the middle of something and she'll have a half mutated mouth, it'll be fuzzy and out of shot because you've caught her halfway through a word. It's the same thing when you're talking about CCTV systems. If you pull a still image out of a moving video, generally it's going to look pretty lousy. To try and get the detail out of it is really, really tricky. It's not there in the first place. The moving video is better than the still images, but IP and HD SDI, some of them, most of them, can pull those still images out at their native resolution to give you a better, this is happening on the video and here he is in all his detail for the camera to see. There is a technology that Mobotics have got using their own particular streaming video format that allows you to pull still images out of their video stream. So I went to a training session by Mobotics last year where they had this pigeon that was flying past one of their cameras from about 3 or 4 meters away, I'd say, and we had this pigeon flying past and they froze it. And in mid-flight, you've got all the feathers of the pigeon's wing completely outstretched, and you can tell the spines or the quills or whatever it is, the middle part of each feather from the fluffy outside parts. You can see the down underneath is different from the actual main flight feathers themselves. I mean, it was an incredible demonstration of what their gear can do. That's all based on the DSP and the processors that are in their cameras. Their cameras do all the heavy lifting internally. Their software is amazing, and I'll talk more about that with DSPs later, but it is possible providing you use the right cameras to do that too. They actually have an intercom system which also has the same technology in it. So you capture the high resolution video stream of what's going on, but you can also grab those beautiful still images out of exactly who it was knocked on your door. Alright, so let's look at analog versus 1080 recording. And Mike, being my favourite subject and somebody whose copyright, I don't have to worry about infringing, was an easy target. I've got 4 different images here, recorded, faked the recording to get 576 line recordings with 2 different types of lenses and 2 1080p 1080 recordings at different with different lenses as well. So this little one here, this is Mike at 576 line recording at D1 recording with a 2.8mm lens at 1.5 meters. Okay, so wide angle lens, pretty close in. If I try to blow this up to get any detail out of it, well, sorry Mike, you've become a Mr. Potato Head. I can see that he might be wearing something blue on, and that he's got gigantic black eyes, but that's about it. So if anybody that doesn't know him wouldn't know who that was. Move down to this one, which is again 576, but it's a 6mm lens at 1.5 meters away. I blow it up and I can't quite see if he's happy or if he's grumpy. The smile is okay, but I can't see if he's got the laughter lines around his eyes.
Did you say this is a 4mm lens?
2.8 in the first one, this is a 6mm lens. Yeah. The one in the middle at the top, that's a 1080 recording, also with a 6mm lens. So what it does, hang on, wrong screen, let's do that again. Here we go. I've got all the detail I can want in it. I can easily recognise that's who he is. That's true facial recognition by the time you start doing that. Even this is pretty close to it. If you didn't know who he was, there might be some things about it that would get him off, get him out of trouble, as it were. But this is a 1080p recording with a 12mm lens at 1.5 meters. And you can see the detail is right there. We know who it is. We can tell how many days it was since he last shaved. I mean, it's fantastic detail. So the other part of that equation early on, when we're talking about lenses versus focal lengths versus fields of view and distances and all the rest of it, is even with the same lens, that's a 576 line recording at 6mm, that's a 1080 recording at 6mm with a 6mm lens. The difference is huge.
Between 4 times the resolution.
Yeah. So you choosing the right camera for the job makes a big difference with the resolution as well. There's a reason why people like the higher resolution recordings of HD, SDI and IP. They're a lot more forgiving. Even if you don't get the angles quite right and the distances quite right, you've got a lot more native data to work with, so you can do more with the image afterwards if you have to. And it's easier for software to actually process digital images and try to get more detail out of them as well. Analog is a bit of a farce. Those things on the movies and on CSI and so on where they say enhance the image, and it goes from looking like that to being able to see the reflection off his eyeball. Well, no, not off an analog system. Not without their new special magical piece of software that just happens to have arrived this week that does the job. So yeah, choose the resolutions and your angles and your lenses very, very carefully. So the resolution is based on the chip that's in there. The sensor has a native resolution. It's not always completely used to produce the output. You might have a 2 megapixel sensor but only a 1080p output, or a 5 megapixel sensor and a 1080p output. But the last bit that does the processing to turn it into the real video that we look at is the DSP, the brain. It's hard to explain how excited you should be about the brain of a CCTV camera. The lens is great, it gets the right light. The CCD is great, it captures the light. But the thing that actually turns that into something usable, into that video that you want to use, that sets off motion detection, that does the wide dynamic range control, all the rest of that is the DSP. In bigger cameras like this Axis IP camera, you've got the lens at the front, your CCD or CMOS sensor at the front, and then all of this is your DSP. It's separated into an image processor, a compressor, a CPU, some RAM, This is for flash memory, which, local storage and buffering if they need to with the network being full, and an Ethernet interface, which is basically the output for it. All the rest of this stuff is the DSP doing its job. And in a camera like this one, that means that I could put a camera in this store that monitored foot traffic. By using its brain power, it works out where people tend to congregate, which aisles they go up, which ones they don't go up, and I can use that to put product placement in there better, or put advertising in the right spot to get people's eyes on it. Or if I'm doing this over a park, you can see where people are walking because of the beauty paths they walk through, which are not the set path, but the lay of the land that people just prefer to walk along, natural trails. This thing shows you that from a camera point of view. There's also some amazing technology built into DSPs that allows motion detection like you've never seen. Mobotics, again, have got a thing, I think it's called activity sensor. There's a video of their car park at their factory in Germany. It's just a standard IP camera on the outside of their building in the middle of a winter storm in this part of Germany. You've got sleet coming in or rain coming in sideways. You've got 60 knot winds blowing it around. There are trees that are shaking all over the place with leaves on the evergreens and not on everything else. Just absolute bedlam. You can barely see what's going on. The motion sensor at the bottom of the screen is not going off at all until somebody gets in their car and drives out of the driveway, and then the motion sensor goes off because it's detected something outside of natural environment, of things that are sort of expected to things that are unexpected, and that's where it actually starts triggering the recording.
So that's separate from an infrared detector?
Exactly. It's separate from what even you think of as motion detection as well, because it's using a live image processing to work on that video stream and work out that that isn't what's supposed to be happening. Very, very cool
What
technology.
if a bird flies over?
Bird flies over, it could be the same thing. It depends on how you've programmed it and set it. There's a great example on one of their videos of a classroom. You've got 20 people behind lab desks sort of sitting there chatting to each other, but it's only when somebody enters the room and comes into their seat that they actually triggers the motion detection. The rest of it is expected background level stuff. So really, really cool technology that's in the DSP or in the processing of a lot more expensive IP cameras and things like that. In terms of analog cameras, they've got less features. Their brain power is less, because if you start spending as much on the processing chip as you do on the rest of the camera, you may as well start spending some more money on the rest of the camera and go to HD, SDI or to IP. But my favourite technology for analog cameras is wide dynamic range, WDR. We talked about it briefly before when you're talking about changing lighting conditions, and this is what wide dynamic range does. I know that Darren's done some presentations on this in the past for different people, and I know that most of you know what WDR is already. For those who don't, very simply put, wide dynamic range is a lighting control. So it adjusts to extreme brightness and extreme darkness in the same frame and gives you a more stable level of both. So you can see details in areas that were shadowed before and blur out some of the area, or block out some of the areas where the lighting is too strong. To give you a good live example, this is a video I've shown to lots of people. I'm just going to pause it at the start here. So we've got so much backlighting coming in from outside that it's sort of bleached out what's going on outside, and inside we know they're curtains. We can kind of see there's a guy here and maybe a collar. It could be a girl, could be a guy, doesn't really matter. They're there. There's something over here with some reflective stuff. You've got no idea what the hell this thing is. So we let them turn the WDR on. We start from this. The guy's just waved away a fly. It's only because I've seen this so many times that I actually know what's going on. And when it flicks it on, and suddenly there he is. I can see the colour in the shelving. I can see the colour in the... Oh, hang on. It's gone again. Look at outside. Look at the detail in that building that's across them that you can and can't see when you just flick between those two modes. WDR is an awesome technology to have, and it's not that expensive. Look for it in the Pro Series camera. Make sure it's on the list of things you get when you buy a camera. If you're talking about purely inside, like a room like this one, you don't need it, because you don't need that wide dynamic range to deal with static lighting conditions. where you've got huge amounts of backlighting and other problems, it's essential. My favourite video I've been playing with for this is from one of the manufacturers we deal with, which is Vivotech. Jump back to here. This is off their YouTube page. WDR on and WDR off. So it's about 30 seconds worth of this, and the detail between the two is incredible. This is a basic IP camera with WDR enhanced, which is their basic technology. She's clearly wearing something, but it looks like her head's just floating above the ground on the right. A friend of hers has just come up to give her something. Well, I have no idea whether that's male or female on the right. Look at, in the left-hand corner there comes a scooter. I can see there's a scooter in that one. There's no detail here. The reflection of the floor is completely gone. Look at the background. This is trees, according to this one. It's who knows what it is here. And there's blocking and walls over here that isn't even in the next one. This, when she comes back inside, my favourite bit. Look at her face from one frame to the other. I mean, that's where WDR comes into its own. You should look for it if you're dealing with this sort of environment. If the lighting conditions aren't good, make sure you get WDR. Alright, any questions about that? One thing I should say actually is, in our Dome 30 Pros and cameras like that one that we've got that have got WDR in, it's turned off by default. You need to go in and manually turn it on most cameras. Okay? Not sure why the factory chose to do it that way, but there are different levels of WDR, from low to mid to high and so on, and some are better for some environments and some are better for others. I'm assuming they just thought, let's leave it off and people can choose how much they want to work with. But yeah, if it's a feature on your camera, definitely get in and have a look at it.
Which cameras have them? Yours or the Pro Series?
Everything we've got that's got everything that we have that's got a Pro FEOP sensor has it in there. Yeah. There are cut down versions of it, things like ATR, as Darren said, which is automatic tone reproduction, I think. It's kind of like WDR, but yeah, essentially. WDR's got a lot more processing. Proper WDR has a lot more processing levels, so a lot more between pure white and pure dark. WDR is also the tech you need if you've got things like headlights shining into a camera lens to be able to deal with it. If you go to YouTube and search for WDR plus, I think Vivotech's got a good one, but Axis and Acti and Mobotics have got all their own versions of it too. A car sitting right there and you've got two headlights into the camera, you turn WDR on and there comes the license plate. Turn WDR off and the license plate disappears because of all the bloom of light from those two car lights. There are differences between different versions of WDR. It's a processing thing after all. The smarter the camera, generally the more expensive the camera, the better the WDR, the better the performance is going to be. But yeah, professional IP cameras with WDR are probably going to start anywhere from about $800 to $1,500 or so for a camera that's decent. Alright.
Backlight control, some have got.
They do. Backlight control is a good start, but it tends to apply a filter to the whole thing, so you end up with some areas that are dimmer than they were before. You still see some detail in there, but they're not quite as nice, unfortunately. So, based on everything we've talked about the three different about the lens, the sensor, and the DSP, I've got the specs for 3 cameras up here, and I'd like some volunteers to give me environments where you would use each of these, starting with the Axis D55 3 megapixel dome camera. So having a look at this list here, what instantly sticks out at you? Joe? What do you think? You can't see past everybody else in front of you. Probably picked the wrong person there. Do any of these, any of those features stand out as more than others to tell you what job it should be using?
Small room, no sunlight.
Indoor.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Small, 6mm fixed. Is that the lens?
Yeah, it's the lens.
Yeah,
on top,
it's
yeah. So it's a fixed lens.
So you got a wide angle.
Fairly wide, yeah. So you probably wouldn't want to put this as a doorway camera or something like that.
Got a lot of detail, but
No WDR, so it's useless if you've got extreme lighting conditions.
No, maybe a foyer or something?
Yeah, foyer's not a bad idea, facing back in towards the building. Rooms like this one, probably pretty good. The angle that it's at would give you a good view of this room. 1080p record, 1080 recording at 30 frames is a nice recording type as well. So yeah, good indoor dome camera, and it has got a 3 megapixel sensor in it too. So you can, again, take those still images alongside. So if you're using it in a shoplifting sense or something like that, theoretically you could have your stream going on and your security guy just pings the guy with a 3 megapixel image to make sure he's exactly who he says he is, or she. So, going from the Axis across to another IP camera, the Vivotech. Okay, I quite like this camera. It's got a fair few features that are quite nice about it. Can anybody point out some main ones and give me an application that you'd have for it?
It's got a 1/2 inch LED sensor.
Not quite, so 1/2.7, sorry, it's a bit hard to read from back there. So these are all about a 1/3 inch, slightly, yeah.
There's a variable lens as well.
It is a variable lens, it's also a remote zoom lens. So in a control room you could zoom in and out on something. So somebody coming through a driveway, you could zoom in on their number plate and then zoom out to capture the thing. So that's nice.
Be good for sort of a commercial car park.
Definitely.
Where you've got variable lighting.
Yeah.
And you need the quality.
Yeah, absolutely. The only thing I would say with it is the 3 to 9 millimeters still means that you'd want to be fairly close with it. We're talking above the boom gates or just in front of the boom gates looking down or something like that. Maybe on a guard's shack looking alongside them or something there. Again, 1080p, yes, it's got WDR and it's got full outdoor rating. In fact, this is a vandal-proof dome. You could shoot this thing with a shotgun apparently and it wouldn't cause it any troubles. I haven't tried that, but it's one of my list of things to try. So yeah, pretty good, good capable camera. It's got a certain amount of infrared performance for nighttime as well, and with the sensor that it's got and the DSP, it should do a really good job at nighttime. And last, but I don't think least, is our humble little Dome 30W Pro. And I know that most of the guys here have sold a lot of these, or it's grey alternative. Why do we sell so many of them, do you think, James?
Pretty versatile. You can use them indoor, outdoor. They've got a good resolution, they've got a very good lens on them. They've got WDR, so you can use them inside, outside, extreme lighting conditions.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Very waterproof as well.
That's it. It's probably... Price point's good too, yeah.
Not so much.
Yeah.
Most people buy the Dome 30.
Sure. But the difference between this and the Pro and the other one is that this has got that wide dynamic range in it. So if you're dealing with those extreme lighting conditions outside, you've got to go for these Pro cameras. Rec retail on this one, I think, it's under 200, might be 180 or 189, something like that. And the Dome 30 normal version is about 135. For the extra $50 or so to get that extra performance for WDR and a couple of those other things, yeah.
So sorry, being said, so when with the WDR, you've got to actually activate it.
You do, in most
So
cameras.
it's not factory default to on?
No. Because there are different stages and different levels of WDR. I'm assuming the factory decided that people could choose whatever they wanted to. And because they were putting it in the hands of professional installers, they would go through all the menus and play with all the options anyway for it. It's what I'm assuming they're thinking, whether they thought that much or whether they just didn't tick it in the factory settings, I have no idea.
So do you have different settings of WDR in one
You can
camera?
have different scales or different levels of processing for it.
Within one camera?
Yeah. So some higher level stuff will block out more obtrusive lighting, but it's not as good at capturing the details in the dark. If a lighter WDR level might be better in an environment where it's less bad, if you know what I mean. So anyway, most of them have that capability to switch it up or down, or in some of them it's even a sliding scale of how much you want to tweak it to do the job. So cool, yeah, the Dome 30W Pro is a good familiar camera that we've sold a lot of. Alright, my last little thing, I only mentioned very briefly, but a lot of these IP cameras have also got micro SD or micro SDXC or micro SDHC card slots on them. A lot of people think that's for local recording, and it can be, but more often than not it's used for buffering. So that when your network is congested or there's a problem with what's going on the network, it stores a bit of footage there, and when the network clears, it can just shove all of that back down to the recorder to do its job. without losing that footage as it goes. So it's a clever feature, but it's also something you need to sell on top of the cameras themselves if you're doing the job. Okay, my last slide, my last main point. What can a camera see? Depends on the distance to the thing you're looking for, the size of the thing you're looking for, the lenses of the camera that are involved in looking at it, the positioning of the camera, the resolution of the CCD, the sensor inside, the lighting conditions you're in will make a huge difference. I had a guy in Queensland who we had his camera come back twice. It's weird ghosting, only at night time. And he swapped it over, used other cameras in exactly the same environment, and still had the same problem. It's one of the Dome 30s, and I was pulling my hair out because it worked perfectly here when we tested it at day and night. Got it up there again the third time, and we got him to plug it in his garage, and it was working perfectly there. No ghosting, no fogginess, no nothing on the lens. Put it on the outside of the house, and instantly it happened again. Got him to shift the ball joint just slightly, and it cleared up perfectly. What was happening is he put it on the side of his house on the wall, and it was facing sort of along the wall, not at a really sharp angle, but along this way. The outside of the house, some paint that's used in Queensland, not around the rest of Australia so much, is IR reflective. And so it was just enough to blow it back into the lens. One of those really odd conditions that happened. Graham had one the other day where it was fogging up and causing problems with the image, and sure enough it was a spider web in front of the camera that's causing the main problem.
Something was flicking like this.
So the spider's bouncing up and down on his spider web in front of it and causing dramas. So the lighting conditions and the conditions of the camera will make a big difference in what it can see too. And basic maintenance call will often fix some of the main problems with it. And then the settings and absolute features will change it too.
Sorry, but one of my clients had one where the IR was reflecting from another camera too.
Yeah, absolutely.
They can see each other.
Yeah, two IR cameras are pointing across from each other. They'll blind each other out. I mean, it's, you meet somebody when you're camping, you've both got torches in your hands, neither of you can see what anybody can see because you're pointing it in each other's face. So, yeah, it happens a lot off glass, mirrors. Gyms are pretty bad for it. Lots of shiny surfaces, so people can look at themselves. Well, be careful with IR in there. It can reflect all over the place and cause you dramas. You're better off not having IR in some of those, but having a really low light performance. 0.1 lux, 0.01 lux to really low brightness stuff. Works really well too. Cool. Well, they're the basics of what I wanted to talk about for cameras. I've well and truly gone over, so I don't want to talk about accessories, but I will answer any questions or anything else that you've got. I hope this has helped you choose the right cameras for the right jobs in future.
Thank you very much.